Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Was not expecting to do a video today, but we have a very unusual sight for this time of year. We have a moderate risk, level 4 out of 5, for parts of the southeast, stretching from northeast Louisiana in through Mississippi, Alabama, into southwest Georgia, with a large enhanced and slight risk area surrounding that. This is not something we see very often in this time of year. Again, we're in mid-June right now. Usually we see the severe weather risk translating to the northern half of the country as that jet stream shifts northward, but that is not the case for today. We have a very potent severe weather setup on tap, especially within this moderate risk level 4 out of 5 area. All hazards on the table for today. We have a tornado threat. There is a large 2 and 5% area stretching from northeast Texas and the Arklatex all the way eastward to the Georgia-South Carolina coast, with a 10% hatched area in there from southern Alabama into southwest Georgia. So a widespread area of tornado threat does exist for today, with a threat for a few strong tornadoes in that 10% hatched area there in southern Alabama, southwest Georgia. Large to significant hail is on tap for today as well. A 15 and 30% hatched area stretching all the way back toward the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and areas to the northeast and east. We have a 30% hatched area there from the Arklatex eastward into central Mississippi, with a large 30% area stretching all the way into southwest Georgia. So significant hail is on tap for today. We're going to tell you why in just a few minutes. Damaging wind also going to be a major threat for today. 45% hatch. That is extremely high. 45% hatch within that moderate risk area from northeast Louisiana into southwest Georgia. There is the potential for a derecho to develop from the multiple rounds of convection this afternoon into evening. Again, this is an extremely rare sight for this time of year. Usually we see that derecho season all the way up here into the Midwest. And just as a side note, this is a map of June, July, and August for all the moderate risks issued by the SPC between June of 2002 and June of 2023. And you can see one thing that's not like the others there. We have our lone moderate risk for today down here, well away from our typical areas up here in the Midwest and Great Lakes region. So this is a quite anomalous setup for this time of year, but it is a potent one, perhaps very significant one, that needs to be paid attention to if you live in the southeast states today. We're going to get into the meteorology here in just a second. We already have storms that are firing. Let me go ahead and show you the ongoing radar. This is the current radar. Multiple clusters of storms ongoing right now. We have some all the way back here on the Red River. You can see them come into the frame right there. One cluster up here in northern Arkansas, and then a couple of clusters up here in northern Mississippi and northern Alabama. These have prompted severe thunderstorm and tornado watches at this point. This is the current watch situation right now. I am currently in Denver. It is 9:24 here, so 10:24 a.m. Central Daylight Time as we are recording this right now. Severe thunderstorm watch stretching along the Red River into the Arklatex. One up here from northwest Arkansas down into northern Mississippi. We have a new tornado watch that is out for much of Alabama, with the ongoing convection expected to slide to the south here. This cluster here in northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, expected to slide to the southeast today. We also have additional development down here in southern Alabama that could pose a severe threat going into the early afternoon hours today. So multiple rounds of convection ongoing today. This is not going to be the main show necessarily. We are expecting to see multiple rounds later this afternoon, and we're going to get into that here in just a second. So we're going to go right into our upper air maps. This is our 500 millibar map, our current 500 millibar map. And a couple things you see right off the bat: trough here in the northwest, big old trough here in the Great Lakes region into the northeast. And we have this strong belt of flow that is here across the southern portion of the country. Again, this is not something we see often this time of year. As we've talked about in our previous few videos, we've been dealing with this omega block across the middle portion of the country, trough here in the west coast, trough here in the northeast, with a big ridge of high pressure in between, hence the term omega block. Well, that has broken down completely, and we have this troughing now in this stronger belt of flow here across the southern portion of the country. As we've said multiple times already, this is unusual for this time of year. Usually you see the jet stream focused here in the northern portion of the country, the northern plains, Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, the Dakotas, into the Midwest. This is a very anomalously far south jet stream, perhaps an impact of that subtropical jet from El Nino, that supercharged subtropical jet, as we've entered into an El Nino phase of ENSO. But nonetheless, this is a very strong, potent flow pattern that is situated here aloft. with multiple little shortwaves embedded in the flow. You can see a few different kinks there. Kind of hard to tell here, but a few different kinks in the flow. Perhaps if we go down to 700 millibars, we might see them a little bit better. There's one back in here, just little sort of ripples here in the flow that may assist storm development today across the region. Now, the low-level pattern is somewhat nondescript. Here we are at 850 millibars. We do see some semblance of low-level jet here, a little bit of a trough here at 850 millibars associated with some stronger flow aloft, 30-35 knots there centered across far eastern Arkansas into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. This is going to translate eastward as we go through the day today. We should have a decent amount of low-level jet, not something we would see in March and April across this region where you have a very strong surface response with those deep digging troughs. But we do have some low-level response here with this upper-level system, and that is translating into somewhat of a decent low-level jet, at least for this time of year across the region. We know what the low-level jet does. That tends to enhance the low-level shear across the region for perhaps tornadic storms in a given environment. Just like the 850 millibar pattern, the surface pattern is somewhat nondescript as well. We don't see a very strong surface low. Perhaps one up here. This could be convectively enhanced as we have those complexes of storms ongoing across Mississippi into Alabama. Perhaps a little bit of a convectively enhanced area of spin right in there at the surface. But otherwise, a nondescript surface pattern here across the country, not your typical very strong surface low you'd see with your southeast type events in early spring. But we do have a couple boundaries to deal with, and we'll describe them here as we look at our surface data. So once again, not a very clear surface picture at this point. One thing we see right off the bat, though, these green values are the dew point, and they are juicy. Upper 70s to even 80s dew points. We're getting some 80s readings in here. Not sure how accurate this is. 84-degree dew point there and an 81 right there. That, I believe, is the result of a thunderstorm that went through here just recently in this area, as reported here on this METAR here. But nonetheless, across the area, dew points in the mid to upper 70s south of what appears to be a surface boundary in place right here. You see the winds here across southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, more out of the southwest, with a little bit of a shift right in here to more, it's tough to say, but we have a little bit more southerly winds right in here, or southeasterly winds right in here, so it does appear that there is some sort of boundary situated right in this vicinity right here. And again, it's very difficult to tell where exactly that boundary is, as the surface pattern is fairly chaotic. We have some storms ongoing that are messing with our surface observations. There does appear to be some sort of front, at least a stationary front in here. WPC has drawn this in as a stationary front right here. So this should be our main surface boundary focus for storms today. And this will be modulated by outflow from the ongoing storms. The ongoing complexes of storms should put out some outflow here that could modulate the placement of this boundary. Looks like it will end up somewhere in this vicinity. Shouldn't move too much going into the afternoon hours today, but it may be modulated by the outflow from the ongoing storm. So we'll have to watch where exactly that sets up, as that is going to be an impetus for severe storm development here this afternoon, and it could be where the greatest tornado threat is for any storms that ride that surface boundary. But once again, very juicy air mass here across the region, and I want to go into some soundings now as well, because we are seeing some pretty unique soundings for this area for this time of year. This is Lake Charles, Louisiana, so far southwest Louisiana, and you see right off the bat strong instability. This is for the 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time sounding, 12Z. Already very, very strong instability at this point, almost 2,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE at 7 a.m. That is extremely strong. This is definitely something you're not used to seeing this time of year in this region, accompanied with strong deep layer shear. But strong instability in place at 12Z. This is what a typical classic loaded gun sounding. We have strong, steep blast rates aloft here from the elevated mixed layer. We talk about the elevated mixed layer ad nauseum on the channel here. The EML is that layer of strong, well-mixed, warm, dry air that emanates from the desert southwest and western Mexico and west Texas, and gets translated eastward atop that mid-level flow and atop that low-level moist layer to help build that instability in given environments. And that's exactly what we've got going on here. In fact, the lapse rates here in the mid-levels are right around the maximum that we've seen in the recorded history going back to several decades here. These lapse rates here in the mid-levels are right about the maximum, the most we've ever seen for this area in this time of year. So this is, again, a very anomalous setup, very strong, very steep lapse rates aloft here, and often in these southeast setups, we don't have this strong of capping, this strong of lapse rates aloft, and oftentimes you get very messy convection, very not so super robust updrafts, and a lot of updrafts that don't really realize their potential in these early spring strongly sheared environments. That's not the case today. This is a very impressive thermodynamic environment. When you couple that with this kinematic environment, deep layer shear, very strong, longer photographs here, deep effective shear about 50 knots there. So very strong deep layer shear for severe storms. And we already have some curvature in play in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. A little bit of veering of those low-level winds with height, a little bit of curvature there in the photograph. So when you couple this thermodynamic environment with this kinematic environment, significant severe weather is going to take place. And we have very moderate to strong instability with somewhat weak low-level shear at this point. This is not overly strong low-level shear, and this should maintain throughout much of the day. This is why we're going to see perhaps a significant hail threat across these regions, given these steep lapse rates and strong instability aloft with somewhat weaker low-level shear. That is going to translate into a very significant hail threat, along with the threat for more semi-discrete convection, at least in the early stages of development. Let's go out to the east a little bit, take a look here. Let's maybe do Jackson, Mississippi. Once again, extremely steep lapse rates aloft here. You see this layer, this maximum lapse rate layer between about 700 and about 600 or 550 millibars here, registering at 9.2 degrees Celsius per kilometer. That is extremely high, especially for this region in this time of year. Usually this time of year, you see these more saturated soundings, very much weaker lapse rates aloft, and you get these pop-up summertime thunderstorms that frankly aren't too robust. But when you have these kinds of lapse rates aloft, that contributes to extremely strong instability. You see over 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE here at Jackson, Mississippi this early in the morning. Only expected to increase as we go into the afternoon hours today. So this is a very anomalous thermodynamic environment for this area for this time of year. When you couple that with strong deep layer and low level shear, that is going to focus a very significant severe weather threat for this area, for any area with these kinds of parameters and profiles in place. Just happens to be that it is the southeast for today's setup. We go to Slidell as well. You see much of the same. This is impressive here. Slidell, Louisiana. This is at 12Z, remember, 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time. 3,500 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE, and that's just at 7 a.m. Sun's barely come up at that point. We already have this much instability in place. Very steep lapse rates aloft there. You see that very strong layer of steep lapse rates there. So some capping in place. This is a classic loaded gun. Deep moisture there, extending up from the surface above 850 millibars. With this kind of a profile here, deep layer shear, very strong. Low level shear, some veering of those low level winds with height. No wonder we're expecting to see large hail, perhaps a few significant tornadoes today in this environment. Sorry for geeking out over the soundings there a little bit, but this is just something you don't see hardly at all this time of year, especially in the southeast where we're seeing our severe threat for today. So let's go into some model data. This is going to be the 12Z NAM. It's initialized those troughs there in the Northwest and the Great Lakes here pretty well. Here's our belt of enhanced flow aloft here. Very low amplitude feature as well. Just these little subtle shortwaves rotating through the mostly zonal flow here across the region. You see these pockets of the red here. That is probably convectively enhanced there, but nonetheless a large pocket of strong flow aloft there, helping to initiate severe storms today. And even though we don't have a very strong, well-defined trough here, with this strong flow aloft, you can still have that rising motion associated with the exit region of those troughs in this kind of a situation. Because if you'd imagine you have this just strong zonal flow aloft, that's pushing air out of a given region from west to east. And if you're left with no air in this region, what does Mother Nature do? It tries to initiate rising motion to compensate and fill that void, and that's how we get that rising motion in this kind of a scenario where we just have strong zonal flow aloft. Still, we do have some embedded shortwaves in here that will help things out, but again, we're going to have multiple rounds of convection, severe convection, thanks to just this strong flow aloft, the surface boundary, strong surface heating, and strong instability in place today. So you see that mostly zonal flow continues through much of the day, and then it into the morning hours tomorrow starts to exit the region. 850 millibars. Here, let's go down and see our low-level jet throughout the day. So we've initialized, we've got a little pocket of stronger flow there across Mississippi into Alabama. That is going to help keep those hodographs pretty strong here, especially in this region across southeast Alabama into southwest Georgia. I think that's why that 10% hatched area is there. We'll take a sounding here in just a second, but not a super strong low-level jet. Again, this is not your early spring type setup here, where you have very strong low-level responses from those strong troughs aloft, and you have 60, 70 knot low-level jets. This is not the case today. We do have some semblance of low-level jet here that will help increase that low-level shear for today's setup. Let's go down to the surface. Once again, it's a very nondescript surface pattern, not much to speak of besides this little boundary here, and it's a little bit tough to tell, but we do have somewhat weak winds in the low levels. But here is where our surface boundary is expected to set up here, somewhere in this vicinity. And again, it's tough to say because there's convection ongoing up here, but there does appear to be some convection, perhaps outflow enhanced, the outflow modulated boundary here. Somewhere in this vicinity, could be a little bit farther south. Would not be surprised to see a little bit farther south. Based on current observations, it might actually be a little bit farther south. We'd put it probably somewhere in this vicinity right in here across more south central Alabama. But again, it's tough to say given all the convection that's ongoing and the overall weak surface pattern. But that boundary is going to be the impetus for significant severe weather development today, and any storms that can ride that boundary where the enhanced low-level shear is, we'll have the threat for a few significant tornadoes going into the afternoon today. Dew points, not going to be a problem as far as moisture goes. You can see just all this purple. We have some 80s dew points out there in the Gulf of Mexico, those pinkish colors there. Lots of purple going inland. That's our 70s plus dew points there. So very significant low-level moisture to deal with. And so let's take a sounding here. I want to take a sounding. We are expecting multiple rounds of severe storms today, as we said. Perhaps one back in here along that boundary, perhaps a little shortwave moving through closer to the main axis of the shortwave trough. Let me go back quickly to our 500 millibar map here. So you see the axis of this trough back in here in the western, or the Texas Panhandle. That's going to translate eastward today. And associated with that, perhaps in a little bit of a stronger flow right in here, we will see storms fire in southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, as well as out here ahead of this little perhaps shortwave trough out here in southern Alabama into southwest Georgia. So multiple rounds of convection ongoing, aside from our ongoing convection today. You already see some storms firing here in southeast Alabama, additional development expected going into the afternoon today, and then additional development back here, southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana. So let's take a sounding here. Let's take a sounding. We'll do one here at 21Z, perhaps right ahead of this convection here in south central Mississippi. And then we'll take one out here in southeast Alabama, just to show you in the axis of that low-level jet. So back here, back to the west, a little bit removed from that low-level jet. This is going to be why the large hail threat is most notable back to the west. We see very strong instability here, 3,600 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. Very strong low-level moisture there, 87/73. Deep moist layer there. The cap has eroded thanks to that strong flow aloft, cooling, a little bit of cooling aloft associated with that shortwave trough moving in. Strong instability, but weak low-level shear. Low levels are very, very weak here across the region. And therefore, strong instability, weak low-level shear. That is a classic combination for significant severe hail. Back to the east a little bit, closer to the axis of that low-level jet, we still have pretty much the same instability profiles, 4,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE out there in southeast Alabama into southwest Georgia. So lots of instability to speak of. Again, very strong low-level moisture there, steep lapse rates aloft. But we have a lot more low-level shear to deal with, a lot more veering of those winds with height in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. That is creating a lot more spin in the low levels. Storm relative helicity, effective storm relative helicity, almost 300 meter squared per second squared there. You can see in the hodograph, strong curvature there in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. That is what's going to lead to a tornado threat, perhaps a significant tornado threat out in areas farther to the east, and that's why that 10% hatched area is focused on southern Alabama into southwest Georgia. That's going to be where the axis of the low-level jet is. Stronger low-level shear with that instability is going to favor more of a tornado threat, along with some large hail threat and a damaging wind threat. But the tornado threat is going to be much stronger, much higher out to the east this afternoon and evening. We'll go down to 0Z, see how the environment evolves with time going into southern Mississippi. We'll take one out here again, kind of on the Alabama-Georgia line down there in the southern portion of those states. So again, the low-level shear back west remains fairly weak with strong instability. That is going to favor a large hail and damaging wind threat as those storms kind of congeal into a complex, given the strong deep layer shear. Strong instability there. This is a pretty classic look for a derecho. We will see those storms fire back to the west, and we'll show you some convective allowing models here in a second. But those storms will fire back in here and conglomerate into a complex that fires out there and travels along that surface boundary. Threat for a few tornadoes, perhaps some spin-up tornadoes in the line, but mostly a damaging wind threat will take over from this westernmost area of convection. Now back to the east. Profiles stay pretty favorable for a significant tornado threat going into the early evening hours here. You see strong instability still in place. A little bit of capping building back in here at 0Z. Wouldn't worry too much about that. That may be a little bit of a NAM quirk. But nonetheless, the profiles here, any ongoing supercell is going to be able to take advantage of this strong low-level shear. Just over 350 meters squared per second squared of effective SRH there. That, coupled with the instability and a fairly semi-discrete mode out there in the eastern portion of the risk, that will continue to favor a significant tornado threat out in there. And then eventually, later on, the complex from the west will move through. Stronger low-level shear perhaps out here, a few more spin-up tornadoes out there in the line with that damaging wind threat that will take over. So let's take a look at some convection allowing models here. This is the latest HER. Actually, let me go to the 14Z run. That is the latest HER that is in. So it's initialized the ongoing complexes pretty well here across the region, northern Mississippi into northern Alabama. And we have lots of storms starting to fire here by this point. This is 17Z, so about noon Central Daylight Time. Storms firing here across southeast Alabama, and these storms that are firing in northern and Mississippi and Alabama strengthening, and they will move in a little bit farther to the southeast. So you can see some semblance of semi-discrete updrafts in here, and any more semi-discrete updrafts will have the threat of producing a few tornadoes, perhaps some strong out here, given the stronger low-level shear out in this area. Now back to the west, we see initiation here by about midday, just after lunchtime or so, early afternoon. We see lots of supercells start to fire here in the Arklatex vicinity and to the east across southern Arkansas, far northern Louisiana. These will also dive to the southeast as they start to turn right of the mean flow. Again, mostly a large hail threat out here, given very veered low-level winds, very weak low-level shear out in here, but very strong instability. Likely going to see some very significant hail reports out in this regime here. Those will dive to the southeast, and you can see they conglomerate into a complex going into the early evening hours towards sunset across central Mississippi into Alabama. And we see this very potent complex make its way through, even into the Florida panhandle there, going into the nighttime hours tonight. And you can see this complex going to be very long-lived. That's why we have the potential for a derecho with this activity, given the long-lived nature, strong shear aloft, helping to keep these storms going well into the nighttime hours tonight. So a very, very potent setup today. You can see multiple regimes of severe storms, the ongoing complex across the northern portion of the Gulf Coast states, some storms firing out there as well in southeast Alabama. Those will have a tornado threat as well. And again, these complexes from northern Mississippi, northern Alabama will move into the area of best low-level shear for tornadoes going into the afternoon. Large hail back here to the west, conglomerating eventually into a complex of storms that may become a derecho. So all in all, a very, very unique setup for this time of year in this area. Not something we see very often at all. Once again, a moderate risk level 4 out of 5 for this area. Shreveport, the enhanced area extends all the way back to the Arklatex, Shreveport, and areas to the east. The moderate risk starts here in northeast Louisiana, I-20 corridor, Jackson, Mississippi, out toward Columbus, Georgia, Dothan, Alabama, and areas in between under the gun with that most significant severe threat for today in that moderate risk area. Again, all hazards on the table. Tornado threat is there, large 2 and 5% areas there, with that 10% hatched area there for southern Alabama and southwest Georgia, and we will see the threat for a few strong tornadoes in that area in particular. Damaging winds going to be the play as well, or in play as well. We have a strong threat for a derecho, and that will be going into the evening hours today, and we will see that complex of storms out to the west conglomerate into that pretty significant complex moving into southern Mississippi, southern Alabama this evening with a significant damaging wind threat there. And large hail going to be a threat, particularly back west where the low-level shear is weaker. 15 and 30% hatched areas there, extending all the way back into the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, into the Arklatex areas to the east, into central Mississippi. So all in all, a very potent setup. Folks in these areas not used to this at this time of year, but nonetheless need to take the warnings seriously today, as this could be a very significant event. We will probably see a ton of severe weather reports today, so definitely take those warnings seriously, keep those weather radios handy, and have a shelter in mind if severe weather heads toward your area. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.